Cold reality first. There is a town in Ontario where polar bears walk past people's doors every autumn. Not in the Arctic, not in Nunavut, in a Canadian province millions assume is civilized, southern, and safe. If that can be true inside Ontario, imagine what the other 49 facts will do to your mental map. Ready? Let's start. Part 1. Impossible geography that should not exist. 1. Manitoulins Island in a lake on an island. Manitoulin Island defies geometry. It is the largest freshwater island on Earth, floating inside Lake Huron, and it contains its own lakes, like Lake Manitou, which in turn holds smaller islands. Within one of them, Treasure Island, lies a campsite where you can stand on an island in a lake on an island in a lake. This looping geography feels like a cartographer's glitch, but it's real, and it reminds us that Ontario's geography doesn't play by linear rules. 2. The underground neutrino city. 2 kilometers below Sudbury, scientists built Snow Lab, a world-leading underground laboratory so silent it can detect ghostly neutrinos streaming through the planet. Carved from a nickel mine, its clean rooms helped confirm that neutrinos change flavor, a finding that earned the 2015 Nobel Prize in Physics. Buried in ancient rock, it's both a scientific cathedral and a metaphor. Ontario hides answers to cosmic mysteries inside the wounds of its mining past. 3. A crater you can live in. Greater Sudbury rests inside the scar of a 1.85 billion-year-old meteorite impact, one of the largest ever to hit Earth. The blast vaporized rock, formed a basin 15 kilometers deep, and scattered metals that seeded one of the richest nickel-copper deposits on the planet. Today, the city thrives atop what was once hellfire. Few realize their streets trace the rim of an ancient apocalypse that built an economy and rewrote planetary geology. 4. The waterfall capital. Hamilton, often dismissed as an industrial relic, hides over 100 waterfalls within city limits. They tumble along the Niagara Escarpment, a ridge older than the Great Lakes themselves. Factories and foundries once roared beside cascades now reclaimed by hikers. The juxtaposition is startling, a Rust Belt skyline above a rainforest of falling water. It shows how Ontario's most engineered landscapes still leak wildness through every fault. By the way, videos like this take weeks of research, long nights of writing, and a painful amount of editing. If you value this kind of work, support it. Like the video and subscribe. 5. When Niagara Falls stopped. On March 29, 1848, residents awoke to silence. The mighty Niagara River had stopped. An enormous ice jam upstream diverted flow for nearly 30 hours, leaving the Horseshoe and American Falls eerily dry. Locals wandered across the exposed riverbed, picking up coins and relics as if trespassing on a forbidden floor. The next night, the water returned with a roar, erasing the evidence. Ontario briefly witnessed what happens when gravity forgets. 6. Boats that ride a railroad. On the Trent-Severn Waterway, the Big Chute Marine Railway replaces a lock with rails. Entire boats are hoisted in a cradle, rolled over land on steel tracks, and lowered back into the next stretch of water. It looks absurd, ships driving over a hill, but it works flawlessly. Built to avoid contaminating lakes with invasive species, it's a piece of moving infrastructure that makes the impossible seem routine. 7. The glass-flat mesa of sand. Prince Edward County sandbanks are among the world's largest baymouth barrier dunes, sculpted by ancient glaciers and restless winds. Their shifting walls of sand bury forests and uncover them again centuries later, swallowing time as easily as trees. These dunes advance and retreat like tides, frozen in slow motion, erasing human footprints within days. Even modern mapping struggles to capture a coastline that refuses to stand still. 8. A cable car by a Spanish genius. The Niagara Whirlpool Aerocar, designed by Spanish engineer Leonardo Torres Quevedo in 1916, still glides above churning rapids where the river twists into a violent vortex. Suspended by cables that cross an international border, It moves with no towers at midspan, an aerial bridge built when flight was barely a dream. Over a century later, it remains one of the oldest operating cable cars in the world, timelessly defiant of both gravity and politics. 9. World's longest freshwater beach. Wasaga Beach stretches for 14 kilometers along Georgian Bay, an inland shore so wide it behaves like an ocean. Waves roll in, tides appear optical, and sunsets fade over horizon lines of pure blue. Yet the water is unsalted and shallow enough to wade far into the bay. The illusion of a freshwater sea is complete, and it turns the heart of Ontario into a maritime paradox, a coast with no coastlines beyond itself. 10. The world's largest freshwater archipelago. The 30,000 islands of Georgian Bay scatter across pink granite like shards of a shattered continent. Pines grow wind-bent from Precambrian stone older than complex life. This archipelago is technically the largest freshwater island chain on Earth, a maze so vast that even in the 21st century, maps disagree on its count. It is Ontario distilled, impossible scale hiding inside apparent normalcy. 11. Flower pots that aren't plants. On Fathom 5's Flower Pot Island, limestone towers shaped by wind and waves stand like gigantic stone mushrooms. The stems once supported entire cliffs, now they guard turquoise coves above shipwrecks preserved in water so clear that decks and masts remain visible. Nature carved sculptures while history sank artifacts beside them. Ontario turned erosion into architecture and disaster into museum display. 12. The city with a secret wilderness. Beneath Toronto's skyline lies a 300-kilometer network of ravines, wild valleys, hidden rivers, and forests that thread between suburbs. Deer, foxes, and coyotes move unseen through corridors wider than many national parks. Most Torontonians cross bridges above them daily without noticing. The land beneath the metropolis still breathes as forest, proving that even Canada's largest city stands on terrain unwilling to be tamed. 13. The underground mall that never sees winter. Toronto's Path is the largest subterranean shopping complex on Earth, linking more than 30 kilometers of climate-controlled tunnels beneath downtown. In winter, thousands walk entire commutes without stepping outdoors. It's a hidden parallel city where temperature, light, and even time feel artificial. What began as convenience became adaptation. Ontario's ultimate shelter from itself, a reminder that survival here often means going underground. Part 2. Cities sitting on glitches in time. 14. A man-made peninsula turned wild. The Leslie Street Spit began in 1959 as an arm of rubble for a future port, poured into Lake Ontario in layers of broken concrete, rebar, and brick from Toronto's boom. However, wave shadow formed lagoons, wind ferried seeds, and cormorants nested in snag forests until an accidental headland evolved into a 500-hectare bird sanctuary on a self-extending spit. Engineers aimed for quay wall. Succession built marsh, thicket, and colony. Industry drew the outline. Ecology wrote the map. Nature hijacked the blueprint decisively. 15. Badlands of Martian Red. From this improvised coastline, the story moves inland to the Cheltenham Badlands, where 1800s forest clearing exposed iron-rich Queenston shale that slicks and slumps when wet. Meanwhile, every rainstorm flutes the clay into rills, and the hematite hue bands into candy stripes as thin skins desiccate and crack. Fences, boardwalks, and controlled access now limit trampling because one boot can trigger miniature landslides across ribbed slopes. It looks extraterrestrial because we removed the atmosphere. Trees. Human cause, alien result. Fragility learns a voice, softly. 16. White mountains older than the Rockies. Even so, age speaks louder along the La Cloche Range near Killarney, where snow-white quartzite ridges are ancient sandstones metamorphosed and tilted. The skeletal core of peaks erased long before today's Rockies rose. Glacial polish turned hard quartz into gleaming pavements, and frost wedging still prizes plates from jointed crests. Paddlers read entire structural stories from shore. Straight fractures, sparkling float, erratics perched like punctuation. These are the ghost peaks of an older origin, stubborn to weather. Hike them and you tread ancestry. Stone remembers persistently. 17. A canyon by commuter rail. As a consequence of this deep time, Ottawa's present looks provisional beside the Ottawa River's hydraulics, where standing waves like Garvin Chute and the Lorne crash within a national capital's commute. Spring freshet loads the channel with cold, snowmelt pulses and pushes wave trains past office towers. Kayakers scout eddies while trains cross steel trusses, each system on its own timetable. Power sits beside power here, policy beside momentum. The city is buffered by law, not water. Bureaucracy meets current daily. 18. The canal that becomes the world's biggest rink. Meanwhile, the Rideau Canal, cut by Royal Engineers in the 1820s as a military bypass, freezes each winter into a 7+ kilometer skateway when consecutive nights reach the magic -10 degrees Celsius range. Crews drill, flood, and plane the ice to maintain thickness and smoothness. Thermistors read the slab like a patient chart. A defensive artery became a seasonal commuter route threaded through embassies and parliament. Civil servants glide on history disguised as recreation. Infrastructure keeps changing jobs, quietly. 19. Ancient stone messages. But the most surprising thing is that Ontario's longest-lived texts aren't paper. At Petroglyphs Provincial Park, marble outcrops hold hundreds of indigenous carvings, canoes, shamanic figures, turtlebacks, protected today by a ventilated roof that prevents freeze-thaw exfoliation. Elders speak of this rock as a teaching place, not a ruin. The engravings still function as knowledge, not display. Marble softness made it a pad for communication. Time made it sacred. The language is cut into bedrock. Stone keeps the syllabus, faithfully. 20. A fish trap older than Rome. On the same shield of memory, the Minjiconning fish weirs at Atherley Narrows reveal rows of stakes radiocarbon dated to centuries before the Roman Republic. Ribs of wood once guided spawning fish into basket traps where Lake Simcoe squeezes into Couchiching. Archaeology maps the pattern. Hydrology explains the harvest. Continuity frames the economy. Ontario's inland seas did not wait for canals to be engineered, they were engineered with wood and current. The design is millennia old, effective. Heritage lives in water, quietly. 21. Whale bones in farm fields. What many did not see coming is the sight of marine shells and beluga remains in eastern Ontario's plowlands. Relics of the Champlain Sea that flooded the St. Lawrence lowlands after the ice sheet collapsed about 11,000 years ago. Isostatic rebound lifted seafloor into hayfield as land sprang back millimeter by millimeter per year. Farmers turn fossils with the seasons, an archive of salt where corn now grows. Agriculture rides on a retired ocean calmly. 22. The Quartz Blue Grotto. Even so, the Bruce Peninsula's grotto looks Mediterranean until you touch the water. The Niagara Escarpment's dolostone walls arch over an inlet where refracted light turns superior cold water electric turquoise. Wave surge pumps through a submerged tunnel and pressure pulses throb in the cave like breath. Summer crowds wade into hypothermia in under 10 minutes if they linger. Beauty and hazard share the same geometry here. The color invites, the temperature refuses. Blue warns, silently. 23. A city once scorched like the moon, then regrown. Meanwhile, Sudbury's mid-century sulfur dioxide plume stripped vegetation across a basin until bedrock glared. And NASA used the moonscape to train Apollo 16 in 1970. Since the 1970s, lime has sweetened soils, slag has armored slopes, and volunteers have planted over 10 million trees. Jack pine, birch, larch, restarting nutrient loops. A mining city turned its footprint into a laboratory of repair, measured in canopy cover and pH. Rehabilitation here is not a metaphor. Regrowth is counted tree by tree. 24. The other singing sands. However, even repaired ground can sing. Near Tobermory, singing sands hums when dry. Well-sorted quartz grains shear just right. Frictional stick slip turns motion into audible vibration. The pitch shifts with grain size and moisture, so wind and footsteps tune a beach like an instrument. It is physics you can hear, grains gossiping as they roll. Ontario's shorelines don't just look alive, they sound it. Acoustics bloom from sand, briefly. 25. Polar bears without roads. Finally, the script leaves pavement altogether. At Polar Bear Provincial Park, a tide-flat world on Hudson Bay, reachable only by float plane or canoe. There are no roads, no campgrounds, no services. Only ice margins, migrating bears, and weather that detonates plans. Tundra polygons pattern underfoot. River mouths braid into turquoise fans. Sea ice writes and erases borders. Ontario includes a subarctic margin inside a G7 economy and declines to tame it. Sovereignty breathes here as silence. Access ends, range begins. Part 3. Water, ice, and stone acting against physics. 26. The cliff that paints itself. Along Superior's storm coast at Agawa Rock, red ochre images of canoes, moose, and the horned water spirit Mishipeshu cling to a vertical wall that waves strike in every gale. Hematite pigment bound with fish oil penetrated microfractures, then capillary films of lake water repeatedly dissolved and reprecipitated minerals that sealed the paint-in. The cliff is both canvas and conservator, refreshed by every surge. Art survives because water works, not despite it. Living varnish every storm. 27. The inland sea that makes its own weather. Lake Superior holds roughly 12,100 cubic kilometers of freshwater and a surface larger than Scotland, so it breeds pressure gradients and long fetch winds that drive 3 to 6 meter waves and adiabatic fog banks on summer cold water upwellings. Heat capacity delays warming, so even in July, the epilimnion can be 8 to 12 degrees Celsius, inducing shock cold immersion in minutes. Caves glaze in rime when spray flash freezes, turning shorelines into white armor. It is fresh water that behaves oceanic, maritime physics inland. 28. Ontario's Niagara of the North. Kakabeka Falls near Thunder Bay drops about 40 meters across flat-lying Keweenawan basalts in sedimentary layers, a resistant cap over weaker beds that undercut and high discharge. During spring freshet, suspended load scours plunge pools, and in winter, frazzle ice accretes into shelf-like rims that later calve. The cliff face exposes 1.2 billion-year fossils within shale partings, a museum cut open by hydraulics. A highway watches headward erosion do math in real time. Constant force, simple steps. By the way, this kind of deep dig content is not recycled. It costs time, energy, sources, and sleep. Help keep it alive. Hit like and subscribe so it can continue. 29. Amethyst by the truckload. On fissures and meteoritic cavities east of Thunder Bay, hydrothermal fluids rich in silica precipitated quartz that grew purple with iron and irradiation into amethyst, often forming druzy carpets inside vugs. Crystal habit records growth pulses like tree rings, and zoning reveals chemistry swings along fractures. Visitors literally mine their own gemstones with buckets because the deposit's aerial extent is broad. Elsewhere it's luxury, here it's weekend geology. Abundance flips value, quietly. 30. A sinkhole that swallowed a street. In carbonate belts beneath Ontario towns, slightly acidic groundwater dissolves limestone along joints, producing conduits that roof over with clayey till until a threshold load snaps them. Then pavement and pipes drop in a single brittle failure, revealing cylindrical throats lined with solutional scallops. The surface map ignores the void map until collapse stitches them together. Rain, traffic, and time do the engineering. Gravity finishes the sentence, abruptly. 31. A lake that once ran backwards. Great Lake seiches occur when wind stress and barometric gradients displace basin-scale water masses. When forcing relaxes, the mass sloshes, sending standing wave nodes racing along shores. On rare pulses, rivers like the Niagara momentarily slow or reverse, and gauges show oscillations with periods of minutes to hours, depending on basin length. It is a bowl with inertia pretending to be many rivers. Gradient is not destiny here. Water argues back, briefly. 32. The cliff ring city on a faulted rim. North Bay sits on the lip of the Ottawa-Bonnechere Graben, an ancient rift where the crust stretched and subsided along steep normal faults. Rock scarp faces expose joint sets that guide freestall wedging, while talus cones build at angles of repose that tell the story of block size and friction. Urban grids wrap this mechanical architecture as if it were decorative. The city plan mirrors a failed tear. Stress fossils still legible. 33. Where two forest worlds meet. Point Pelee narrows to a migrating sand spit where Carolinian species reach their climatic edge. Tulip trees, hackberries, prothonotory warblers threading swamp woods while monarch butterflies funnel south. Lake breeze fronts concentrate migrants and shallow lagoons warm fast, increasing insect emergence. The spit itself shifts with longshore drift, a pencil of sand rewritten by storms. Canada and the US meet here ecologically, not politically. Two biomes shake hands, delicately. 34. South of parts of California. Pelee Island lies below 42 degrees in, warmed by the thermal inertia of Lake Erie, which tempers frost and extends the growing season for vineyards on fractured limestone. Karstic sinkholes host calciphile plants, and reefs ring the shoals where wrecks sit in clear water. The island's latitude equals northern Italy in places, but its climate is lake-edged, not Mediterranean. North and south are crude tools here. Latitude misleads, water corrects. 36. A waterfall wall through a province. The Niagara Escarpment is a beveled cuesta of resistant Silurian dolostone capping weaker shales. Where streams cut the rim, nick points retreat and waterfalls multiply. Dolomite's interlocking crystals add compressive strength, so caprock persists while undercuts enlarge until ceilings fail. Caves form in stress shadows, and tufa precipitates where spray keeps carbonate supersaturated. One structural hinge explains hundreds of local dramas. A single geometry, many cascades. 37. A lift lock that floats you up. Peterborough's hydraulic lift lock couples two steel caissons. Because water weighs 1 ton per cubic meter, adding just a few centimeters of water to one side makes it heavier, so it descends and lifts the other. Gate seal by upward hinged guillotines. Pressure equalization prevents shock loads, and the whole rise of 20 meters happens in under 10 minutes. Gravity is the motor here. Balanced mass, elegant motion. 38. The lake with shipwreck glass. In Fathom 5, cold oligotrophic water limits decay and biofouling, so wooden hulls from the 1800s rest intact in 6 to 20 meters, visible from the surface when the wind lies down. Low dissolved organics and sparse algae keep attenuation lengths long. Iron fastenings stain timbers but do not erase form. It is conservation by chemistry, a museum curated by temperature and clarity. History survives because growth is scarce. However, the pattern linking them is not just spectacle, it is mechanism repeating across scales. Paint persists by mineral films, waves build climate, rocks fail by planes, water sloshes by inertia, cliffs retreat by contrasts, and ships rise by mass balance. Ontario's physical world is not passive background, but an engine, and engines imply outputs we have yet to count. What else is being driven, quietly? Part 4. Planet-scale consequences hidden in one province. 39. A moraine that feeds cities. The Oak Ridges Moraine arcs for roughly 160 kilometers across southern Ontario, a ridge of glacial till, sands, and gravels stacked by the last ice sheets between 12,000 and 13,000 years ago. Its coarse layers act like a sponge and a sieve at once, storing and slowly releasing groundwater to headwaters that supply the Humber, Don, Rouge, and dozens more streams. Toronto's taps lean on this buried reservoir even when the surface looks suburban. Cities drink from an ice-made bank, quietly. 40. Ice wine alchemists. In Niagara, vintners leave Riesling and Vidal grapes on the vine until temperatures hit at least -8 degrees Celsius, often in December or January. Then, at night, they harvest and press berries whose water is frozen, but sugars and acids remain liquid. The must emerges syrup-dense, yielding a wine with piercing acidity and concentrated sweetness that wins global competitions. Ontario turned winter from a threat into a technique, converting cold into currency. Frost becomes flavor, deliberately. 41. The Great Lakes Storm Factory. Southwestern Ontario straddles two inland seas whose heat budgets and fetch produce violent weather. Lake-effect snow squalls that bury Highway 21 under whiteout walls, and late spring supercells that spin off EF2 to EF3 tornadoes across farm grids. Wind shear over flat lake plains and sharp thermal contrasts load the dice every season. What looks like mid-latitude quiet is in fact a workshop for atmospheric engines. Geography manufactures weather repeatedly. 42. A UNESCO sandspit that won't sit still. Long Point projects 40 kilometers into Lake Erie, a living bar of sand threaded with dunes and wetlands, shifting under longshore drift and storm surge. It is one of the globe's finest examples of a cuspate foreland, protected as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Sections migrate, breach, and heal in slow motion, rerouting channels and habitat year by year. Ontario owns a moving peninsula that redraws itself without asking. Cartography chases sand here. 43. A city where streets go subterranean. Toronto paved over creeks like Tattle, Garrison, and Castle Frank, sending them into brick and concrete culverts that still drain valleys erased from the map. During cloudbursts, buried channels remember their floodplains, and water finds old paths beneath basements and roads. Urban planning rides on hydrology it tried to silence, and every high-intensity storm is a history lesson in runoff. Hidden rivers still steer a metropolis, stubbornly. 44. The Black Fly Curtain. In May and June, Algonquin's brooks and muskeg hatch out simulinium blackflies in such numbers that locals plan trips around them. Larvae anchor by silk pads to submerge stones in clean, fast water, filtering with fan-like appendages until warming triggers emergence. The result is a living curtain that tests patience and gear, signaling lakes and streams clean enough to breed swarms. Purity and discomfort arrive together in the bush. Beauty bites, literally. 45. Oldest rocks you'll ever touch on a trail. North and west of Superior, hikers step onto 2.7 billion-year-old Archean granitoids and greenstones of the Superior Craton. Continental crust forged when Earth's mantle was hotter and tectonics worked differently. Pillow lavas freeze submarine eruptions in stone, and banded iron formations record early oceans oxygenating. The numbers are not abstract. They are under boot soles on ridges and portages. Ontario lets you walk prehistory in daylight. Deep time feels local, suddenly. 46. A lighthouse that mined a whole island. Silver Islet, a wave-lashed speck off Sleeping Giant, held a vein so rich that 19th century engineers ringed it with cribwork, pumped out Superior, and drove shafts into rock until the lake repeatedly tried to take it back. By the 1880s, the venture had produced millions in silver before storms and water finally won. The islet was literally built higher to keep mining alive. An ore body fought a lake and lost eventually. 47. The bridge that taught ships to climb. The Welland Canal lets ocean-going freighters bypass Niagara Falls by scaling the escarpment in a flight of locks that raise or lower vessels about 100 meters between Lakes Erie and Ontario. Pumps, culverts, and gravity choreograph tens of millions of tons of cargo per season through chambers the size of apartment blocks. The canal reorders continental commerce by turning relief into a staircase. Ontario converted stone height into trade. Pragmatically. 48. A forest that's secretly one tree. Trembling aspen often reproduces clonally, sending shoots from a shared root system to form groves that are genetically identical. In Ontario's boreal and mixed woods, a stand can be one organism wearing 1,000 stems, rerouting nutrients underground after wind throw or fire. What looks like a crowd is one body distributing risk and light. Even the forest cheats our census, coherently. 49. One province, a fifth of the world's fresh water. With roughly 250,000 lakes and a shoreline that reads like fractal geometry, Ontario holds an astonishing share of Earth's surface fresh water, often cited around 1/5 when counted with the Great Lakes. The number is not just trivia. It is leverage over shipping, energy, food processing, and climate resilience across half a continent. Canada's global role as water steward is not theoretical here. The portfolio is liquid, immense. 50. The Inland Sea Meteor and the Ghost Particles. Only in Ontario can you stand on an ancient impact basin like Sudbury's, born of a 1.85 billion year strike that sprayed nickel across a crater the size of a city. Then descend 2 kilometers underground into Snow Lab to watch neutrinos whisper through a vat of heavy water. A hole in rock seeded an economy. A hole in matter's interactions let physics measure the unmeasurable. A province linked a planetary wound to a cosmic instrument. Crater and cosmos, connected. However, these are not isolated curiosities. They are cogs meshing in one upstream machine. The moraine feeds headwaters that flood buried creeks that pulse into a lake whose storms sculpt a spit, that hosts birds whose migrations cross vineyards whose ice wine depends on cold delivered by the very inland seas that power squalls. As a consequence of this, Ontario's geology and climate operate like a quiet supply chain for life, trade, and meaning, routed through ice, sand, and stone. The map is not scenery here. It is infrastructure that breathes. Meanwhile, that living infrastructure keeps producing symbols. An island that had to be raised. A canal that teaches ships to climb. A forest that is one body acting many. And a physics lab that listens for particles that barely touch the universe. What many did not see coming is that the biggest absurd facts are not spectacles at all, but leverage points. Places where a ridge, a vein, or a lock multiplies into policy, markets, and survival strategies without asking anyone's permission. Even so, the lesson is sober rather than mystical. Land acts, we react, and the reaction writes demography and economics as tangibly as any budget.